Temperature here in Chicago really just started to warm up, and of course all I can think about are summer cocktails. Now the thing is, even though I create cocktails for a living and I consult with bars and restaurants on their beverage program, and I use an assortment of fresh produce, herbs and syrups and different liqueurs, at home when it comes to my own refrigerator, I'm really quite a minimalist. I don't have a lot of syrups on hand and I hardly have any liqueurs at home. I really keep all that stuff at work at the R&D lab. I do love to cook though, so I do often have a lot of fresh produce on hand. But when I'm cooking, I also don't want to be prepping a cocktail. I just want to have a cocktail ready to go without any effort. Do you feel me? Am I the only one that thinks this way? What it comes down to is that when I'm at home, I want a cocktail that's really, really easy, but also delicious and uses fresh ingredients. I also want a cocktail that has ingredients that have an extended shelf life because I never know when that cocktail craving is going to hit. So is there such an ingredient that exists, a single ingredient that I can simply add to my gin, vodka, or tequila and be ready to go? An ingredient that is already balanced with sweetness and acidity, has an extended shelf life, let's say about 3 months, and also uses fresh produce. Well, there is such an ingredient, and in this episode, I will show you what that ingredient is and also how you can make it yourself. But first, if you're excited for this episode, go ahead and hit that like button and also make sure to subscribe. It really does help me, and also it ensures that you don't miss any upcoming content. Welcome to another episode of Natalia Con Gusto. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. Once again, demystifying cocktails, spirits, and ingredients so that you can make better cocktails at home. What is this ingredient? It's called a shrub, also known as a drinking vinegar. This was very popular in the 18th and 19th century and is a way to preserve summer's bounty. You can think about pickling. The way this would work is you would take your fresh fruit, often berries, trimmed of course, which I haven't done here, but you would take your fresh fruit and then you would add an equal amount of granulated sugar over top. You would then allow that to sit overnight, about 24 hours. What that sugar would do is it would pull all of the moisture out from inside of the fruit through osmosis, creating this pulpy, fruity syrup. Once that syrup was complete, then you would add your vinegar. So you could do balsamic vinegar, for instance, or Prosecco vinegar. You could do sherry vinegar, all different types of vinegar. And that vinegar would act as a preservative, which is why that shrub has an extended shelf life over your standard 1 month shelf life of your regular simple syrup. Once your shrub is ready, that's really it. You can simply add it to club soda and ice for a refreshing non-alcoholic drink in the summertime, or you can add it to your gin, tequila, or vodka, top it off with club soda, and you are done. All of this sounds really straightforward, right? And it is. But like with most things related to cocktails and recipes, there are some caveats or some considerations. And it's these considerations that oftentimes websites completely leave out, or they don't elaborate on them because frankly they want you to click on the article and they know that you're not going to read through paragraphs and paragraphs of information. But that's why I'm here. So the first rule of creating a shrub is you want to add an equal amount of sugar and fruit. There are some websites that will tell you to put the sugar and the fruit over the stovetop over a gentle heat so that these flavors combine and they meld together. But after my research and from talking with multiple bartender friends, really your best option is to do that cold method, which is pouring the granulated sugar over the fresh fruit and letting it sit overnight. What this will do is it will keep that fresh integrity of the fruit intact. By cooking it, you're really going to dull all those flavors, and that's not what you want. Another consideration, keep in mind that sugar is acting as sort of a preservative here. So if your natural inclination is like most of my friends and family, which is to eliminate or completely minimize the amount of sugar that the recipe is calling for, please resist that temptation. You need the sugar to balance out the entire shrub. At the very end, once the shrub is completely finished, then you can choose to add just a tiny bit of the shrub to your final cocktail. But for now, leave the sugar in. For the shrub I'm making today, I'm doing a bit of an experiment with you. Most recipes call for fresh berries like strawberries or blueberries or blackberries. However, I bought this fantastic watermelon and I really want to use this. I'm also thinking about that really hot summer day 2 months from now when all I want is watermelon in my cocktail, and I don't want to work for it. I just want to have that ingredient ready to go. I also toggle back and forth with inviting you on this experimental journey with me. I could either just show you the finished product at the very end if it worked out in my favor, or I can invite you into the process. In the end, I've decided to invite you into the process because, hey, we are in this together. And I also promise to demystify cocktail spirits and ingredients. And this is part of the process of demystifying ingredients and figuring out how to work with what you've got. So you're in it, baby. Here's the experimental part of this. I'm not mixing granulated sugar with watermelon chunks and letting it sit overnight. Watermelon already has such a high water content, so there's really no point in trying to draw out that water content because it's already there. So what I did instead is, earlier this morning, I went ahead and juiced my watermelon. Something else I've considered is that watermelon already has such a soft, delicate flavor profile, so I really want to be able to boost that up and amplify it. So instead of using regular granulated white sugar for my mix, which white sugar does not add any flavor whatsoever, it only adds sweetness, I want to add some flavor. So for that, I'm incorporating a local wildflower honey for my sweet component. I'll measure about 1 cup of my watermelon juice in this measuring cup, but just to make sure that I'm extremely accurate and also that I can replicate the results, I will then weigh that, and then whatever weight that comes to, I'll add an equal amount of weight of my honey. I also think that it's really important that I show you this process even though it's just stirring honey and watermelon juice, because sometimes when you're making cocktails, yeah, some of the steps are kind of simple, but when we're reading the ingredients or reading a recipe from a website, we often tend to think that this is way too simple, it can't be that easy, and that's where we go astray. Because if you're reading a recipe and you think it's too simple, so many of my friends and family have decided that they'll take their own course and they start immediately modifying and changing things up without ever tasting what the original product was supposed to taste like. So really know that there is a methodology behind everything and there is a reasoning behind everything. That is so good. That's delicious. It's going to sit overnight, so I'll see you back in 24 hours, and at that point, we'll walk through the vinegar process. Okay, it's been 24 hours, time to check on our watermelon honey mix. Oh yeah, that tastes really lovely. Watermelon and the honey have fully integrated, and now it's time to add our vinegar. But like with most things, there are some considerations once again to be made. Now, in my research and trying to figure out how to make the best shrub possible, I've been reading books and looking up online articles and also consulting some of my bartender friends to figure out the ways that they've made their own shrubs. What I found is that everyone is making their shrubs just slightly differently. And I've narrowed it down to 3 different ways that people have been making their shrubs. The first way that people make their shrubs is the one that's the most prominent. That's the one that I've seen in the most articles and on the most websites. And really, I'm using it as a baseline, and I think most of my other bartender friends are using it as a baseline as well. And that is using equal parts of sugar, fruit, and vinegars. And then most websites will tell you that you can promptly serve this product. Once again, this is not the route that we're taking. The second route that I've seen used widely, and I've seen it used by a lot of bartender friends as well, is once again using an equal amount of fruit and sugar. This is the part that everyone seems to agree on. But then afterwards, after letting it rest for the 24 hours, same as we did here, you would add an equal amount of vinegar and water. The water would tame the tartness of the vinegar, that sharpness, so that you could then promptly serve it. And then the third route that you can take, and it's the route that we'll be taking today, is once again doing equal parts of our fruit and equal parts of sugar, letting it wait for 24 hours. And then I'll be using that 1 cup, that equal proportion, as my baseline, but I'm not going to add the entirety of the vinegar to my watermelon honey mixture because I'm going to use my taste buds and I'm going to adjust. So I'm going to add just a little bit at a time just to see where that balance lies. I had already mentioned yesterday, still part of the same video, but I had already mentioned that watermelon already has a very delicate, soft flavor, so I really don't want to overpower that with a strong vinegar. So it's really going to make a difference which vinegar I decide to go with and also how much vinegar I'll use. Now, after adding the vinegar, the difference here with this route is I'm not adding any additional water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let it sit for 2 weeks. Because even though I know that water will tame that sharpness and that tartness from the vinegar, time can also perform that function. So in this case, I won't add any additional water, but I am gonna let it rest for 2 weeks. But first, I wanna talk just for a moment about vinegar and what it is. And honestly, this is the part that gets me really excited, and this is why I think working with real ingredients is so enthralling. Now, vinegar is a natural preservative through acidification. This is the same story for pickles, kimchi, salami, yogurt, and various cheeses. This natural acidification process is what extends the life of these raw food items. So you have this raw food item like grapes, for instance, and then once you press it, it becomes grape juice. When these raw food items have natural sugars available for yeast to come in and feast on them, that yeast will turn the sugars into alcohol. And that's how wine is made. When wine is being produced, that fermentation process is stopped and then the wine is bottled and then sold at your store. But let's say we didn't go ahead and bottle that wine and we left that wine out exposed to oxygen for an extended period of time. You might think that that wine would go bad, that it would begin to spoil. But nature is brilliant because a chemical process will begin to develop and that wine will begin to acidify. It will begin to protect itself from any incoming bacteria by producing what's called bacteriocins. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'll put it on the text underneath. But these are proteins that have antibacterial properties against closely related bacteria, which means that mold or fungus or anything else won't begin to develop on that wine. And that acidity that develops, that sourness, acts as a preservative. It keeps it intact. You can think about it like when you put lemon juice on top of a cut apple to prevent it from browning. That acidity is preserving that apple. And that's the same thing that's happening with the wine. As it becomes acidic, it's turning into vinegar. Now, once that wine turns into vinegar and it reaches about 5 to 6% acidity, it is protected from spoilage. It is shelf stable. So you can see that on your vinegars. If you look closely, you can see, for instance, on this balsamic vinegar, it says acidity 6%. What's so cool is that this acidification process, this preservation process has been around and it has been an integral part of our human history for hundreds and hundreds of years. Sometimes we just forget about it because now we have refrigerators, which also extends the life of our food products, also serving as a preservative. What I find so cool and so fascinating about shrubs or working with any natural ingredients is that everything we're using is coming from the earth. How awesome is that? So the wildflower honey that we use is coming from a farm out of Indiana, and the watermelon that I cut up is from Thomasville, Georgia, and the vinegar that we're going to use is a Prosecco vinegar, which I haven't told you already, but that's what I decided on. That Prosecco vinegar, yes, it is made from Prosecco wine, which means it's made from grapes, so yet another product coming from the earth. This is why I need to live on a farm. Truly, if anybody has a farm that I can go work on, sign me up. I am 1000% serious about this. I need to be on a farm or near nature in some capacity. I'm not gonna go down a rabbit hole of describing every single type of vinegar that exists and what it comes from and how it's made, because trust me, I already went through that rabbit hole and I've sent a couple other friends on a vinegar rabbit hole. So we're not gonna go there today because trust me, I can go down that route. If that's what you wanna see, just let me know in the comments and then maybe one day we'll do a vinegar episode. But for now, I'm saving that for another day. Let's move on with our shrub. All right, I have my vinegar and my watermelon. This part is kind of boring, so I'm just probably gonna fast forward through all of this and then get you to the end product. I'll let you know how much I use. I love the flavor of it already. But I also want to add a little bit more complexity to round everything out, kind of like the way that bitters act in a cocktail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crush about half a teaspoon of pink peppercorns into the mix, and I will add that directly in, and that'll be part of the mix that I let rest for 2 weeks. That's really it. I'm going to date this so that I can check on my shelf life, and I'll also be waiting for 2 weeks, and then in 2 weeks we'll do the final reveal and also test it out in a cocktail. But I do want to circle back once again to why I didn't add any water. So there are a couple other considerations here for you to know about. One of them is that, as we already mentioned, vinegar has a preservative quality to it. And I really don't want to dilute that preservative quality because I want to have this have a very long shelf life, as long as possible. And I know that by adding water to this mix, it's going to reduce that acidity and reduce those preservative qualities, which I don't want to happen. The other reason why I'm not adding water and why I'm waiting for 2 weeks is because what we're doing here is we're creating a little mini ecosystem inside of this vessel. So what's happening, and this is once again the part that's really cool and what completely fascinates me about cocktails and spirits and different ingredients, is what's happening in here is that the yeast that remains in here will continue to eat the sugars that are readily available, and as it eats those sugars, it'll convert it into different alcohol molecules. Now, those alcohol molecules, as it begins to sit there, those will begin to acidify, like we talked about with wine. So those alcohols will turn into vinegar. Meanwhile, the existing vinegar acidity that exists in here is adjusting to its new environment, and it's slowly mellowing out. So what should happen after these 2 weeks are over is a dramatic or noticeable drop in that vinegar tartness, that sharpness, and we should have a really balanced, delicious flavor bomb in this vessel. If you have a favorite shrub recipe, or if you have any feedback or things that have worked for you or haven't worked for you, I honestly would love to know. I love hearing from you, and I love hearing about all your different experiments. So please comment in the comment section about what happened when you tried to make your own shrub. If you are curious about making this shrub, or you want access to all of my notes that I put together in creating this video, you can always sign up for my monthly newsletter. It's slated to be released the first Monday of every month, and I'll put all the information in there, same with all the information from previous videos from this last month. I hope you had fun with this episode. I know I did. Thanks again for joining me at Natalia Con Gusto. It was my pleasure to be here with you, once again, demystifying cocktails, spirits, and ingredients so that you can make better cocktails at home. And if you liked this video, please comment with a yes and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me, and it keeps you informed of upcoming content. Of course, make sure to hit that like button, and I will see you next week. Once again, new videos every Thursday, all with the goal of helping you make better cocktails at home.